Robert Boyle was one of the founding members of the Royal Society and considered the first modern chemist. He was also an alchemist, a few of the founders were. He wrote The Skeptical Chemist. It was this book that undermined alchemy and made it unpopular to believe. Boyle's intention was not to destroy alchemy, but to question the cause of it and all things. At the time, many people were taking the alchemical books literally, or at least misinterpreting them, which made progress very difficult if the alchemical books were to be a foundation for modern chemistry. The main point of the book was to question what things were made out of, what the elements actually were. Unfortunately, the book was too successful and used as an argument against alchemy, which was not its intention. Robert Boyle FRS, the 25th of January 1627 to the 31st of December 1691, was a 17th-century natural philosopher, chemist, physicist, and inventor, also noted for his writings in theology. He is best known for Boyle's law. Although his research clearly has its roots in the alchemical tradition, he is largely regarded today as the first modern chemist, and therefore one of the founders of modern chemistry. ATMNG His works, The Skeptical Chemist, is seen as a cornerstone book in the field of chemistry. Boyle's great merit as a scientific investigator is that he carried out the principles which Francis Bacon espoused in the Novum Organum. Yet he would not avow himself a follower of Bacon, or indeed of any other teacher. On several occasions he mentions that in order to keep his judgment as unprepossessed as might be with any of the modern theories of philosophy, until he was provided of experiments to help him judge of them, he refrained from any study of the atomical and the Cartesian systems, and even of the Novum Organum itself, though he admits to transiently consulting them about a few particulars. Nothing was more alien to his mental temperament than the spinning of hypotheses. He regarded the acquisition of knowledge as an end in itself, and in consequence he gained a wider outlook on the aims of scientific inquiry than had been enjoyed by his predecessors for many centuries. This, however, did not mean that he paid no attention to the practical application of science, nor that he despised knowledge which tended to use. Boyle was an alchemist, and believing the transmutation of metals to be a possibility, he carried out experiments in the hope of achieving it, and he was instrumental in obtaining the repeal, in 1689, of the statute of Henry TV against multiplying gold and silver. With all the important work he accomplished in physics, the enunciation of Boyle's law, the discovery of the part taken by air in the propagation of sound, and investigations on the expansive force of freezing water, on specific gravities and refractive powers, on crystals, on electricity, on color, on hydrostatics, etc. Chemistry was his peculiar and favorite study. His first book on the subject was The Skeptical Chemist, published in 1661, in which he criticized the experiments whereby vulgar spagyrists are wont to endeavor to evince their salt, sulfur and mercury to be the true principles of things. For him, chemistry was the science of the composition of substances, not merely an adjunct to the arts of the alchemist or the physician. He endorsed the view of elements as the undecomposable constituents of material bodies, and made the distinction between mixtures and compounds. He made considerable progress in the technique of detecting their ingredients, a process which he designated by the term analysis. He further supposed that the elements were ultimately composed of particles of various sorts and sizes, into which, however, they were not to be resolved in any known way. He studied the chemistry of combustion and of respiration, and conducted experiments in physiology, where, however, he was hampered by the tenderness of his nature, which kept him from anatomical dissections, especially of living animals, though he knew them to be most instructing. Robert Boyle, by en.wikipedia.org. It's very possible that Robert Boyle succeeded in making the stone. Indeed, before he supposedly died, Boyle reported that he was to spend his last years performing hermetic, alchemical experiments. In 1689 his health, never very strong, began to fail seriously, and he gradually withdrew from his public engagements, ceasing his communications to the Royal Society, and advertising his desire to be excused from receiving guests, unless upon occasions very extraordinary, on Tuesday and Friday forenoon, and Wednesday and Saturday afternoon. In the leisure thus gained he wished to recruit his spirits, range his papers, and prepare some important chemical investigations which he proposed to leave, as a kind of hermetic legacy to the studious disciples of that art, but of which he did not make known the nature. Robert Boyle, by en.wikipedia.org. Newton, who was a contemporary of Boyle, warned Boyle against speaking about alchemy. Which is amusing since it appears that Newton failed to achieve anything with alchemy, whereas it looks like Boyle was successful. Isaac Newton wrote fellow alchemist Robert Boyle a letter urging him to keep high silence in publicly discussing the principles of alchemy. Because the way by the mercurial principle may be impregnated has been thought fit to be concealed by others that have know it, Newton wrote, and therefore may possibly be an inlet to something more noble that is not to be communicated without immense damage to the world if there be any verity in the warning of the Hermetic writers. There are other things besides the transmutation of metals which none but they understand. 42. James Price. I'm just going to go ahead and quote the entire Wikipedia article on James Price. James Price, 1752 to 1783, was an English chemist and alchemist who claimed to be able to turn mercury into silver or gold. When challenged to perform the conversion in front of credible witnesses, he instead committed suicide by drinking prussic acid. Bomb in London in 1752, he was initially called Janies Higginbottom but changed his name to Price following the wishes of a relative who had died and left him a legacy. He attended Oxford University and, although no records of his early education or his research at Oxford exist, had a brilliant career there. He became a Master of Arts at 25 and the university made him a Doctor of Medicine in 1778, particularly for his work in the field of chemistry. In 1781, at the age of 29, he became a member of the Royal Society. Work on transmutation. In the following year, he appears to have been working on the transmutation of base metals into precious metals, and on the 6th of May 1782, after revealing his findings to a few of his friends, he began a series of public experiments hosted at his laboratory in Guildford. He demonstrated that he could produce precious metals by mixing borax, nitre, and a red or white powder of his own devising, known as the powder of production, with 50 times its own weight in mercury and stirring the mixture in a crucible with an iron rod. Mixing in the red powder produced gold, the white powder, silver. He performed 7 of the public demonstrations, the final one being on the 25th of May 1782, which were attended by the elite, peers, clergymen, lawyers, and chemists. Some of the gold produced during the experiments was presented to George III. The accounts of the experiments were published with great success. Challenged by other fellows, the fellows of the Royal Society were less convinced, however, and asked him to repeat the experiments in the presence of some of the members of the society. Price seemed less than happy to do this. He claimed that his powders were exhausted and preparation of new samples would cost him time and money and be damaging to his health. He also protested that the cost of preparing the gold or silver by this method was not economical, as it cost £17 to make an ounce of gold, which was only valued at £4. The Royal Society insisted on the repetition of the experiments and reminded Price that, as a member, he was calling the honor of the society into question. Price rebuked them, claiming that his reputation and position in society should prevent any hint of suspicion from being cast upon the veracity of his claims, but eventually he was forced to submit. Events leading to ingestion of poison. In January 1783, Price returned to his laboratory in Guildford, ostensibly to start production of the miraculous powders. In fact, he set about the distillation of laurel water, which contained prussic acid. He wrote his will at the same time, but it was another 6 months before he returned to London to invite members of the Royal Society to witness the experiment on the 3rd of August. Despite the success of his initial demonstrations and the furore they had caused, only 3 members turned up on the appointed day. Although clearly disappointed by the poor turnout, Price welcomed the 3 men and then, stepping to one side, drank the flask of laurel water he had prepared. The three men immediately noticed a change in his appearance, but before they could do anything, Price was dead. His motives for attempting the deception are unknown. He was a wealthy and respected man who had already been honored for his chemical research. James Price, by en.wikipedia.org. It seems strange that only 3 fellows turned up. Perhaps everyone wasn't notified in time. I suspect that these 3 were alchemists themselves and the whole thing was arranged. They either helped him fake his death, or else made him drink the poison. For a little bit of fun speculation, let us remember in Romeo and Juliet, written by Francis Bacon, a Rosicrucian, when Juliet drinks a potion that will make her appear dead for 42 hours. This potion is given to Juliet by a Franciscan friar, Friar Lawrence. Roger Bacon, no known relation to Francis Bacon, was a Franciscan friar and well-known alchemist. Friar Lawrence is presented as somewhat of a philosopher, who studies nature. He is an alchemist, as we can see from the first of his lines. The grey-eyed morn smiles on the frowning night, checkering the eastern clouds with streaks of light, and flecked darkness like a drunkard reels from fourth day's path and Titan's fiery wheels. Now, ere the sun advance his burning eye, the day to cheer and night's dank dew to dry, I must upfill this osier cage of ours, with baleful weeds and precious juiced flowers. The earth that's nature's mother is her tomb. What is her burying grave that is her womb? And from her womb children of divers kind we sucking on her natural bosom find. Many for many virtues excellent, none but for some and yet all different. Oh, mickle is the powerful grace that lies in herbs, plants, stones, and their true qualities. Romeo and Juliet, Act 2 Scene 3, by Shakespeare, 1597 AD. I could therefore speculate that Friar Lawrence is a character based on Roger Bacon, whose books Francis Bacon surely read, as they are well known to alchemists, and even I quoted extensively from Roger Bacon in this book. Now the Rosicrucians, as we know from The New Atlantis, written by Francis Bacon, were studying the effect of poisons a good 200 years before James Price's death. And with the character of Friar Lawrence being an alchemist and the whole story written by an alchemist, it is possible that the potion mentioned may well have existed. This could have been what James Price drank, as first doubt that the alchemists would actually kill one of their own, especially when the damage is already done and no one believed it anyway. Romeo and Juliet is full of alchemical symbolism, as are many of the Shakespeare plays. 43. Fulcanelli. Fulcanelli was the last recorded alchemist. He lived in France during the early 20th century. Fulcanelli's true identity is disputed. There is plenty of information and wild theories concerning Fulcanelli on the internet, so I will cover him only briefly. Fulcanelli wrote 2 books, The Mystery of the Cathedrals, 1922, and Dwellings of the Philosophers, 1929. Both books are primarily concerned with alchemical symbolism in architecture. The latter book also includes some interesting thoughts regarding chemistry. Fulcanelli did not obtain the stone until 1932, after writing his 2 books, which is important to consider as he makes some statements which seemingly contradict the older alchemists. The most notable being that he claims the fermentation process makes the stone only capable of transmuting metals, which I covered in the contradictions chapter. Other contradictions include Fulcanelli claiming that the pretended Brotherhood of the Rose Cross never had any social existence, which is neither logical, and nor does he offer any evidence to support his claim against that which has evidence. The reason Fulcanelli deserves a special mention, instead of just being another obscure alchemist, is because his books show a more modern and scientific take on alchemy. Additionally, his existence shows that alchemy was still alive and well up until very recently. If I'm honest, I think that Fulcanelli did not help anyone by publishing his books. They are full of the type of symbolism that you must already know in order to understand, and I personally feel this type of thing is only a hindrance. You can only understand his symbolism if you already understand his symbolism, which makes it all redundant. Such endless symbolism serves to unnecessarily complicate the truth, bringing people away from the guidance of nature and towards the vain products of imagination and excitement for shadows. 44. Where did they go? Where did the alchemists go? Are they still wandering around somewhere? What happened to the Rosicrucians? The first consideration is that many of the alchemists are likely dead now. Just because they can live forever does not mean that they would want to. Eventually life gets boring. I don't think many lived more than a couple of 100 years. In the end they would have done everything, seen so much, and would be tired of petty human pursuits. I imagine there would be no one to talk to. It would be like living as an adult in a world of toddlers. Saint Dunstan's work, De Occulta Philosophiae e.g.I.A., calls it the food of angels, the heavenly viaticum, the bread of life, and it is undoubtedly next under God, the true alkochodon or giver of years, and he does not so much admire the question whether any man can die that uses it, as to think why the possessors of it should desire to live, who have these manifestations of glory and eternity represented to their fleshly eyes. The Crowning of Nature, by Anonymous, 16th-17th Ken. I no longer wonder, as once I did, that the true sage, though he owns the stone, does not care to prolong his life. For he daily sees heaven before his eyes, as you see your face in a glass. When God gives you what you desire, you will believe me, and not make yourself known to the world. The New Chemical Light, by Michael Sendivogius, 17th Ken. But then again, there were so many alchemists in the 17th and early 18th centuries. This is only 300 years ago, and with so much happening since then, at least some of them must have hung around. So where would they be? Travel would be difficult. Passports would be a hindrance for them. They'd have to have some kind of special connection in order to keep getting new passports. But then their connections would keep dying. And it's extremely unlikely they had a deal with the governments, else the politicians would want the stone for themselves, which the alchemists would not want give them. So in this world of passports and ID cards they would have a problem. If they were still around, you would expect alchemical books to be released every now and again. But it's been years since one was. It's a long silence. Previously they were releasing more and more texts, as they believed we were coming to the end of the age. Now we really are coming to the end of the age, but no news. It's possible this silence has to do with the Rosicrucian answer. They were attempting to band together all the alchemists. My guess is that it worked. The alchemists all heard of them, and being bored wandering around alone, they all joined. The Rosicrucians were active during the 17th century. By the 18th century they had established what was to become modern science, heavily influenced Freemasonry with their symbols, and had a big part in the establishment of the New World colony in what is now the USA. It's likely therefore that they moved their headquarters to the USA. But in retrospect we can see that modern science failed to understand nature, the Freemasons failed to understand their symbolism, and the USA became one of the most corrupt countries on the planet. And the Rosicrucians have disappeared. So they either, 1. all died, by choice or by accident, 2. are wandering around individually with difficulty, or, 3. became corrupt and no longer care about helping the world. There is one more option still remaining. They could have gone to Shambhala. There is a land not far from here. Out of sight, but not out of ear. Where the water's pure, and the breeze, where all are young with no disease, where ages of immortal people dwell, and many a strange beast as well. But no mere mortal can enter there. For it can only be accessed by the air, yet the place is not in the sky. Nor in a place where a plane can fly. From myth and whisper comes a clue, be careful what you believe is true. Indeed you could be standing upon two lands, when all you see is one. Two lands separated by only stone, one you can see, another unknown. I wrote that poem. If you have a tradition throughout all of history of very intelligent people, with access to lost technology, who never age and have unlimited gold, what would you expect to happen? Logic would tell me that these people would establish their own country. A parallel civilization independent to this one. It's the obvious thing to do. So I looked for any information I could find on a land of immortals. And what do you know? It didn't take me long to find it. No human dream is more universal than the longing for a paradise on earth, a place free of the ravages of time and disease, where the best in nature flourishes while the worst is forbidden to enter. By definition, such magical lands can't be near at hand. They must be remote and inaccessible, destinations to be reached by a pilgrimage or a heroic journey. Ancient Tibetan Buddhist texts spoke of just such a kingdom, where the kings blessed with long lifespans await the day when they will take power over the world, ushering in a golden age of peace and justice. This mythical kingdom was called Shambhala. Its location, known only to a few initiates, was reputed to be northern India, or in Xinjiang province in western China, or even near the Gobi Desert. Said to be enclosed by a double ring of snow-capped mountains, the fabled Vale of Shambhala resembled a mandala, Buddhism's circular symbol of the unity of all creation. Exploring the Unexplained, by Kelly Nauer, 2006. For thousands of years rumors and reports have been circulating among the cognoscenti of the nations suggesting that somewhere between Tibet, among the icy peaks and secluded valleys of Central Asia, there lies an inaccessible paradise, a place of universal wisdom and ineffable peace called Shambhala, although it is also known by other names. It is inhabited by adepts from every race and culture who form an inner circle of humanity secretly guiding its evolution. In that place, so the legends say, sages have existed since the beginning of human history in a valley of supreme beatitude that is sheltered from the icy Arctic winds and where the climate is always warm and temperate, the sun always shines, the gentle airs are always beneficent and nature flowers luxuriantly. There in a verdant oasis only the pure of heart can live, enjoying perfect ease and happiness and never knowing suffering, want or old age. Love and wisdom reign and injustice is unknown. The inhabitants are long-lived, wear beautiful and perfect bodies and possess supernatural powers. Their spiritual knowledge is deep, their technological level highly advanced, their laws mild and their study of arts and science covers the full spectrum of cultural achievement, but on a far higher level than anything the outside world has attained. Into this basic theme of the northern utopia popular folklore has woven strange and wonderful features. This place is invisible. It is made of subtle matter, it is an island in the sea of nectar, a heaven-piercing mountain, forbidden territory. The ground is strewn with gold and silver, and precious jewels bedeck the trees, rubies, diamonds and garlands of jade. The place is guarded by great devas from another world and by walls as high as heaven, magic fountains, lakes of gems, or crystal and of the nectar of immortality, wish-fulfilling fruits and flying horses, stones that speak, subterranean caverns filled with all the treasures of the earth. These and many more wonders embellish the landscape of the primal paradise that seems to express the deepest yearnings of the human heart. Numerous sources support the tradition that Shambhala once lay near the North Pole. The Scythian, a branch of the Vedic peoples who roamed the Central Asian steppe in the first millennium BC, told of a wonderful place similar to Shambhala that lay far to the north. They said that if one traveled far enough, one came to lands of mythical and fantastic tribes and beyond them, to the Riparian Mountains, which lay in a desolate waste of snow and darkness that no mortal could cross. Beyond that barrier lay a beautiful country, warm and sheltered from the icy winds outside, where the sun rose and set only once a year, as it does within the Arctic Circle, and there a happy race lived in parklands full of flowering trees. According to the ancient Greeks, this was the northern station of their Delphic god Apollo, the god of medicine, and the land of the legendary Hyperboreans to which Apollo returned every 19 years, riding the sky on a chariot drawn by SW Answer. It was a secret paradise where the heavens turned on the polar axle, which the Hyperboreans revered as the pillar of Atlas and heaven-bearer, and it belonged to a wise and prosperous people who lived for 1,000 years in harmony with each other, free from suffering, sickness and old age. To the Greeks these semi-deified sages were the stuff of myth, for their land was accessible only to gods and heroes, not to mere mortals, and could only be reached by an aerial way. The poet Pindar wrote that, "Neither by ship not by foot couldst thou find the wondrous way to the assembly of the Hyperbore Answer." Air travel is another recurring theme in the legends of Shambhala. Interstellar travel was attributed to its inhabitants long before the development of modern technological and astronomical knowledge. According to ancient Chinese lore, the aircraft and space vehicles of the immortals journey among the stars, observing the habitats of the other races and kingdoms. Andrew Thomas says there is a well-known Tibetan legend that the Chintamani stone, whose inner radiation is said to be mightier than radium, was brought to Earth on the back of a winged horse or lung tar, which he believed to be a metaphor for a space vehicle. Lung tar was supposed to be able to traverse the whole universe as a messenger of the gods, and tales of Tibetan kings and saints making flights on it over enormous distances circulated in Tibet for centuries. Shambhala, The Fascinating Truth, by Victoria Lepage, 1996. Tibetan sacred texts speak of a mystical kingdom called Shambhala, hidden behind snow peaks somewhere north of Tibet, where the most sacred Buddhist teachings, the Kalachakra or Wheel of Time, are preserved. It is prophesied that a future king of Shambhala will come with a great army to free the world from barbarism and tyranny, and will usher in a golden age. Similarly, the Hindu Puranas say that a future world redeemer, the Kalki Avatara, the 10th and final manifestation of Vishnu, will come from Shambhala. Both the Hindu and Buddhist traditions say it contains a magnificent central palace radiating a powerful, diamond-like light. Shambhala, A Real Place or Only Myths, by bibliotechappliades.net. Though its true location has never been found, its beginnings are unknown and its existence is unproven, Shambhala is recognized and honored by at least 8 major religions, and is regarded by most esoteric traditions as the true center of the planet and the world's spiritual powerhouse. It is said to be inhabited by adepts from every race and culture who form an inner circle that secretly guides human evolution. This remarkable kingdom reputedly exists both above and below ground, with a network of tunnels hundreds of miles long. Cars of strange design flash along their length, writes Andrew Thomas, author of Shambhala, Oasis of Light, and they are illumined by a brilliant, artificial light which affords growth to the grains and vegetables and long life without disease to the people. Atlantis Rising No. 21, by AtlantisRising.com. Agartha, sometimes Agartha, Ahati, Agartha or Agartha, is a legendary city that is said to reside in the Earth's core. It is related to the belief in a hollow Earth and is a popular subject in esotericism. Agartha is one of the most common names cited for the Society of Underground Dwellers. Shambhala, also known as Shambhala or Shangri-La, is sometimes said to be its capital city. While once a popular concept, in the last century little serious attention has been paid to these conjectures and the theory is not supported by modern science. Ferdinand Antony Ossendowski's 1920 book Beasts, Men, and Gods discusses Agartha. The myth of Agartha is also known as Shambhala, as it was known in India, the underworld realm peopled by initiates and led by the masters who are the spiritual leaders of humanity. Agartha, by en.wikipedia.org. In the 1922 book Beasts, Men and Gods, Ferdinand Ossendowski, 1876–1945, a Polish scientist who spent most of his life in Russia, wrote of his recent travels in Outer Mongolia during the campaigns of Baron von Unger and Sternberg. Ossendowski related that several Mongol lamas had told him of Ahati, an underground kingdom beneath Mongolia, ruled by the king of the world. In the future, when materialism will ruin the world, a terrible war will break out. At that time, the people of Ahati will come to the surface and help end the violence. Ossendowski reported that he convinced Ungem of his story and that, subsequently, Ungem twice sent missions to seek Ahati, led by Prince Polzig. The missions were unsuccessful and the prince never returned from the second expedition. The British astronomer Sir Edmund Halley, also in the late 17th century, forwarded the theory that the Earth is hollow. The French novelist Jules Verne popularized the idea in Voyage to the Center of the Earth, 1864. In 1871, the British novelist Edward Bulwer Lytton, in The Coming Race, described a superior race, the Vril-Ya, who lived beneath the Earth and planned to conquer the world with Vril, a psychokinetic energy. In Les Fils de Dieu, The Sons of God, 1873, the French author Louis Jacqueliot linked Vril with the subterranean people of Thule. The Indian freedom advocate, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, in The Arctic Home of the Vedas, 1903, identified the southern migration of the Thulians with the origin of the Aryan race. In 1908, the American author Willis George Emerson published the novel The Smoky God, or A Voyage to the Inner World, which described the journey of a Norwegian sailor through an opening at the North Pole to a hidden world inside the Earth. Mistaken Foreign Myths About Shambhala, by Alexander Berzin, 1996. 46. UFOs. We have in these times many things, which were invented by the ancients, which we admit and experiment with, and readily allow them to pass, which if rightly looked at, are hardly to be comprehended by human mind. Altar of the Therific Tyre, by BMI of the Rosicrucians, 1616 AD. UFOs. One of the most avoided topics in the world. Why are people scared to talk about UFOs? It's as if we've been programmed to consider anyone who talks about such things as crazy. We can talk about all kinds of strange things, but we can't talk about UFOs. We deliberately avoid this one topic for no apparent reason. Paul Hellyer is the former Deputy Prime Minister of Canada, an ex-Canadian Minister of National Defence. Even when this guy talks about UFOs, nobody listens. In Britain on the 2nd of July 1995, the big London daily, The Mail, reported that Nick Pope, head of the Ministry of Defence's Air Staff Secretariat's Office of Special Reports, had resigned and publicly announced that he is a believer in UFOs and had seen numerous official reports while working in the Ministry of Defense. There are also plenty of paintings of UFOs which are already hundreds of years old. Look up UFOs in art. I could go on, but there's no point. There is overwhelming evidence already. I just hope you see how this all fits together and who really flies those UFOs. The following is the transcript of a recording from the 1972 UFO conference at Tampa, Florida. Moderator: it was Professor Carr who sent shock waves through the Pentagon and the Air Force on October 14, when he accused the Air Force of not telling the truth about flying saucers. At a news conference in Tampa, Florida, Professor Carr said he had information that the Air Force had 2 flying saucers and the bodies of 12 spacemen on ice in a refrigerated building at Wright-Patterson Field in Dayton, Ohio. At the Flying Saucer Symposium, Professor Carr talked for an hour about what he calls the worst-kept secret in the world. The discovery in February 1948 of 2 flying saucers in northwestern New Mexico, near the town of Aztec. It is known throughout the academic world, the medical world, it is known throughout the Air Force, and above all it is known throughout the CIA, that the air intelligence at Wright-Patterson Field has in its possession a spacecraft, 31 feet in diameter, and it is entirely undamaged, except for a small hole broken in the plastic dome. The transparent plastic dome that covered the cockpit. And because of this accident in space, the 12 small human beings died suddenly of decompression, in the purely mortal way that the Russian astronauts perished last year in a similar accident of decompression during re-entry. They were not shot down by our fighter planes, they suffered an operational loss. However, in this particular case, it was very fortunate that our alert radar net in the western states had the UFO on its screen. In fact, 3 radar stations were tracking an unidentified object at immense altitude and traveling at unbelievable speed when it stopped, fluttered, went out of control, and fell, circling toward the Earth. Because 3 radar stations were locked on it, they were able to triangulate the point at which it reached Earth. That point was 3 miles west of the small town of Aztec, New Mexico, in the northern part of the state near the Colorado line. At that time I owned and operated a ranch in the high mountains of northern New Mexico. It happened in my neighborhood. All available law enforcement officers were rushed to the scene, and planes were flown from the nearest Air Force Base, which is Edwards Air Force Base in the Mojave Desert. And, as they landed, there was a silvery gleaming disc-shaped spacecraft standing on a tripod landing gear. Apparently it made an automatic landing after its occupants had died. And, as the local sheriffs approached with drawn guns, oh, you can be sure the guns were drawn. Let anything new appear, and the guns are drawn. They surrounded the spacecraft and peered into the cockpit, and there, slumped over their instruments, motionless, were 12 small men. The Air Force arrived, and due to their ingenuity, it was quite ingenious, but I won't go into the technical details. They managed to get the door open, and the medical officers said that the bodies were, well, the bodies were still limp and warm. They had been dead only a short time. They were put aboard a hospital plane and flown to the nearest large mortuary, which is at Edwards Air Force Base, where they have, as do all large military establishments, a large refrigerated morgue. After all, a very large base devoted to death would need a TMRGUE. The city of Tampa has a refrigerated morgue for overnight visitors who can't find hotel accommodations. Audience laughter. Edwards Air Force Base received this in February 1948. Now that was one of the worst periods of the Cold War. The president was notified, but the president didn't come. No one knew quite what to do. The bodies were carefully preserved in cryonic (SP) suspension, which is not as the Air Force spokesman on the television program yesterday, in ridiculing and abusing me, said that Bob Carr says little green men are being kept in the frozen food locker. You see, you just change a few words, and you can convert the story of the century into a bit of idiocy. First of all, they weren't green. They were fair-skinned. All were males. They were between 3 and 4 feet in height, 3.5 being about the average. All had light hair, differing shades of light hair, but on the brownish, yellow side. All had blue eyes. All had perfect teeth, without any dental work. All were superb physical specimens, with null asymmetrical development. Dressed in American clothes, they could pass unnoticed on the streets of Tampa as small men or as children. Now, it was decided. Carr pauses. Which do you want to hear about first? The really important news of what our leading metallurgists, electronics experts, and aeronautical engineers were able to find out about the spacecraft itself, or do you want to hear about the bodies? First, let's have a vote. How many of you want to hear about the construction and content of the spacecraft itself? Pauses to take note of raised hands. Now, how many of you will not rest easy until you hear about the autopsy? Crowd laughter. This is by far a majority. And frankly, it's human. Who wants to hear about a giant solenoid when you can hear about an autopsy? One body was selected for autopsy by a carefully screened group of government physicians. Answer. 6 performed the autopsy. It was photographed, motion pictures were made. You may be assured that it was done in an operating theater, under many watchful eyes. And, as our unfortunate little visitor from far away was dismembered and disemboweled, and his organs were laid out and identified, he was found to have the same organs that a human being has, and in about the same place. He was human. The blood type was human. Genes and chromosomes would match up with those of an Earthwoman. Either we are their lost colony or they are our lost cousins. Biologically, the chances of utterly unrelated life developing across the aching immensities of interstellar space, and coming out with 2 absolutely identical species, the odds are like, well, it's like rolling 37 sevens in a row in a crap game. It just couldn't happen. No, we are somehow related. They came here, probably, because they too are oxygen breathers, and water drinkers. If they had been ammonia-breathing turtles, they could have gone to Jupiter or some congenial place. But, no, they were like ourselves, so they sought out our planet. Undoubtedly, there has been an unbroken link going back a long time. Everything was quite normal until the celebrated brain surgeon got out his horrid little saw and sawed open the skull, and laid bare the right hemisphere of the brain, and then the 6 assembled surgeons gasped because they realized they were looking upon something that no human eyes had ever before beheld. There, on the body of a vigorous young man, estimated to be 30 years of age in Earth time, could have been a small Olympic athlete. There in his skull was the brain of a human being several hundred years old. The surgeons said, the brain specialists said that never had they seen the surface of a brain so deeply, and so intricately convoluted. And as you all know, the convolutions of the brain are an indication, an infallible indication, of both the age of the brain and the state of its intellectual development. A feeble-minded person of any age has an almost smooth brain surface. A newborn baby has a smooth brain surface. But, as age and intellectual development occur, the convolutions become more pronounced. These are little folds and rivulets. You've seen them. And they had never seen so highly convoluted a brain. And if the same biological standards apply to their planet, as they apply to this, there was a man several hundred years old who had been spared the infirmities of age, and had never known senility. What a gift this would be if they could tell us how they do it. Ponce de Leon and his fountain of youth. If they could share their medical secrets, and other hygienic secrets with us, what a gift this would be to the human race. How much more amazing than the weapons I must tell you about, or the means of propulsion that the Russians at this moment doing everything they can to try and capture, would be the gift of life to the human race. This is what the Air Force is striking aside every day by armed attacks on unidentified flying objects, which have done nothing hostile toward the United States, except possibly to fail to answer the recognition signal of the day. In the right idiom. Major Donald E. Kehoe in his latest book, Aliens from Space, documents over 1,000 instances where fighter plans have been scrambled to attach harmless UFOs with the most deadly weapons that we have developed, simply to try and shoot one down. They have never succeeded. Certain pilots during debriefing sessions, shaking, ashen-faced, have told their commanding officers that they got within gun range. They opened up with 4 cannon. Not one shell ever struck the skin of the UFO. Apparently they are surrounded by a powerful force field of electromagnetic emissions which is probably intended to protect them from meteorites, which of course are very dangerous, but will certainly make bullets curve enough to miss them. Think what that secret would be worth. This great age of the beautiful young man has profound psychic significance as well. Think what an opportunity it would be to develop the psychic powers, to develop culture, to develop literature, history, and how little space travel would mean to a race whose lifespan was several times longer than our lifespan. Ladies and gentlemen, I am an old man, a retired professor. I have spent my life in the pursuit, however feeble and limping, the pursuit of truth. And I can tell you that the central tragedy of the human race on this planet is not the curse of war, horrible as that is. It is not the burden of poverty, inexcusable as that is on a rich planet. It is not the grief and pain of disease, which is merely a measure of our ignorance because our scientists are making valiant efforts to overcome disease. No, the central tragedy of human life is so commonplace that most of us never face it. It is the tragic brevity of human life. A man or woman just about learns to do his or her job well, and we retire them. They live a little longer and get a few glimpses of understanding, of comprehension, of psychic insight, and we bury them. The life is over long before 100 years. A 100-year-old person is quite a curiosity, and is usually quite feeble. Or, as a Pennsylvania Dutch farmer once said to me, in a very pithy statement, which is much more eloquent than my plea, so slow we get smart, and so quick we get old. That is the tragedy of human life, and that is one of the secrets that our friends from space, that is one of the benefits they might bring us in this 20th century. If we would only stop shooting at them, and let them land in peace at a designated safe zone in the southeastern United States, southwestern United States, at a certain part of New Mexico, where there are no military installations for many miles, would be plainly designated as a safe landing zone. This is Operation Lure, and I want to tell you that in the entire 25 years that we have been shooting at him, there is not one authenticated case of a UFO intentionally banning a human being. Imaging what patience, and what forbearance, for them to have been fired upon and chased, and repulsed in their efforts to be friendly and not once to have harmed a human being. Let us prepare our minds, Then, by banishing fear, let us put aside all boogeymen, and silly talk of little green men and bug-eyed monsters. And furthermore, those who talk that way, let us gently correct them. They're doing a very great disservice to our country, especially to the children. A little child called me up in the middle of the night last night. Is it true we are being invaded from Mars? That's cruel to children. There's nothing to be afraid of. Now, we also stop calling them UFOs. Because if anything in the sky has ever been fully identified, it is the so-called unidentified flying object. The Air Force has spent millions photographing them up close, studying them, measuring them, and have quite a collection of photographs, hundreds of feet of motion picture film, and all of this of course had to be withheld from the American people. Not through any sinister conspiracy, but for our own good. Because back in the days when this material evidence came into the possession of air intelligence, most of you are too young to remember, but we were in the worst days of the so-called Cold War. People here in Tampa were digging air raid shelters in their backyards. If a truck backfired, school children dove under their desks thinking the Russians had attacked. And when the spacecraft itself with the 12 dead occupants was picked up, then of course the Central Intelligence Agency had to intervene. Up until that time it had been an Air Force problem, chasing spooks. Chasing something. But when a foreign intrusion occurs, the appearance of the CIA on the scene is prima facie evidence that the UFOs are real. Let me repeat, the CIA would never have taken over had there not been real UFOs from another world. How foreign can you get? So they, in their wisdom, caused the Brookings Institution in Washington to make a national survey of to predict what the effect on the national psychology would be if the president came on the air and calmly announced that, ladies and gentlemen, these things you are seeing are real, they're from another world, they are piloted by intelligent small human beings like ourselves. There is nothing to be afraid of, and will everybody please stop shooting at them? The Brookings Institution replied that this must never be released, because the American people are teetering on the ragged edge of hysteria already. The nervousness, the tension over the Cold War is so great that for the president to make such a statement official, to give it sanction, would be too much. Too many people would go over the deep end. Professor Robert Carr, 1972.